Welcome to Venture in the South. These are the stories of innovation and success in the southern U.S. that make money, have fun, and do good.
All right, welcome back to Venture in the South, a podcast about angel investing and early stage company development in the southeastern United States. On this week's episode, I'm your host, Paul, and I'm here with Curtis Lee. Curtis kindly agreed to be a guest on the show because he is a Venture South member and advocate, and also very much involved in a new piece of emerging and interesting technology in South Carolina. So I wanted to give Curtis the chance to introduce himself and what he is working on with SC Quantum. So Curtis, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. And it's been exciting to be part of the Venture South team. I'm actually the marketing director for the PD region. I've been a member since 2021. My background really was a combination of a corporate world and also I'm a retired Marine. Back in 2019, left the corporate world and kind of stepped into the fun world of angel investing and independent consulting and a little bit of entrepreneurship. And then outside of that, I've just got kind of a variety of interest. And as we're going to talk about today, one of those popped up a couple years ago, and it happens to be about quantum.
Great. Well, maybe for listeners or viewers that don't know where the PD region is, can you just give us a quick geographical introduction to where you are and how you got there?
Sure. It's really kind of the northeast corner of South Carolina. Think of the I-95 corridor. My hometown is actually Hartsville, South Carolina. The largest population center would be Florence, which I think you're all familiar with.
And so what brought you to that area?
Yeah, it actually was working for Sunoco Products Company, which is a global packaging company and a Fortune 500 company that's headquartered in South Carolina. I moved there over 20 years ago with my young family, and it's become our home.
Great. Maybe before we dig too far into SC Quantum, maybe we could just start at a high level for those of us like me that are not that familiar with the quantum world in general. Why are we talking about this today?
Yes, so that's a great question. It really starts out with anybody who's kind of following the news. You're starting to see more and more about quantum. Let me start out with the huge implications from a national security standpoint. A lot of this is focused around quantum encryption and decryption. That's one of the biggest topics. So think about everything that we have in the digital world right now, and you're probably aware that most nation states are scooping up all this information, especially China, right? With a quantum computer, theoretically at least, you would have the ability to break all that encryption in a matter of seconds or minutes. So think about everything in your digital life being completely exposed to someone who may not have the best intent. So in essence, we're kind of almost sitting in like the early days of the space race, where there's a lot of focus on racing for that particular thing. Outside of that, quantum really is seen as a truly disruptive breakthrough technology that'll have impacts throughout our economy. So think about the early days of the internet, only potentially on steroids. So the big debate right now is how close are we to really seeing quantum being used in practical applications. In terms of the public and private investments that I kind of made reference to put to scale, China has committed to investing $10 billion over the next 5 years, while the U.S. Currently is only sitting at $1.2 billion over the next 5 years. So we've got a bit of a delta there. We can make up some of that because there's a fair amount of private investing going on. And then if we step inside the U.S. and say, what kind of investments even are we making at the state level? Those of you who are following the news may see that Maryland just announced a plan, $1 billion. That's just one state, a combination of public and private investment in quantum. And there's others. If you go over to Illinois, I think they've pledged like $500 million. So, we'll talk later about SC Quantum. We're sitting at 15 million, but we're hoping to grow that number. And then the last thing that I'll mention, there's a lot of hype going on when it comes to investments in quantum companies last year. And we'll talk a little bit later about what some of those numbers are and, kind of where we are in the investing world for quantum.
Okay, got it. So an increasingly pressing issue potentially on the defense and IT security and information security side. And then lots of potential other applications too, as this capability comes online across the whole.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe again, for those of us who are not experts in the space, can you give us sort of the technical introduction to quantum? What is it? What are we talking about? And
Yeah.
how does it work? Because it's a
Yeah,
very
sure.
high level layperson's way.
Well, being a former Marine, that's about the only way I understand things. So, I'll tell you in the way that I kind of understand it, and try not to get into all the fancy terms and theories and all that sort of thing, which, oh, by the way, if you want to get in that, you can have so much fun because it's so deep. But it really starts out with what is the difference between physics, the way we were taught in high school, and we understand it in kind of the visual world, right? The stuff we can observe versus quantum physics. And the simplest way to think of it is classical physics is the physics that we see and we use in everyday life. Quantum physics, it really deals with how subatomic particles interact with each other, which is not the same as what it does in the physical world. So this is the stuff that is behind nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. It's in the natural world, but without getting too deep into it, it's just different. And that's why quantum isn't something that just kind of jumps to people naturally.
Yeah,
So
it's highly unintuitive how it works, right? You cannot visualize it, and it works not the way you would expect anything to work at that level.
yeah, that's exactly correct. And so, what's the so what about that? Well, when we talk especially about quantum computing, most of us understand that, typical computers work off this concept of bits, bits being kind of a circuit that you can turn off and on. So you have a value of one, and you have a value of zero, and you put thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of these bits together, and you're able to do basically linear computations, right? So if a classical computer is trying to solve a problem, what it does is it basically tries to figure out every possible solution for that problem, and it kind of sequentially does them, right? The concept behind a quantum computer is that it actually operates off of something called a qubit. And we'll talk a little bit about, how it does this in just a second. But imagine a bit, but a bit that isn't just 0, 1. It can also be like 0, 1 at the same time, and it can have different values. And so what that allows you to do is two things. One, it makes it a lot more efficient because instead of using, millions of bits or hundreds of thousands of bits, you can do the computations with much less qubits. The other thing that it enables it to do is it can take pathways where it can do multiple pathways at the same time. So instead of that kind of linear, okay, I try, this solution, that didn't work. Try the next one, it didn't work. It can actually do like thousands of them at the same time. So that's why it's so much faster than conventional. Now, it's probably not going to be cost effective or maybe even more efficient than our conventional computers for certain problem sets, but there's others that it will. And so that's kind of one of the big debates right now is, okay, when would I use a quantum computer? When would I not? And so now we're going to get in kind of a little more of the fun theory stuff. I mean, I talked to you a little bit about how a qubit can have these different values, and it does this through this concept of superposition, where basically these subatomic particles are positioned in a way where they're 0, 1 or 0, 1 together and all that sort of thing. But you have to actually get these subatomic particles to kind of work together. They have to be in a certain state for superposition. And this kind of leads into some of the different ways that we do that for quantum computing technologies. The main two that you'll hear about today, one is gate-based. So you push these subatomic particles through a series of gates until you get it to that superposition place where it can really act as a qubit. And then you have to worry about keeping it in that actual superposition. A lot of the early technology requires you to get the materials almost to like 0 degree Kelvin, as cold as you can possibly get it in order to be able to manipulate this stuff. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the early quantum technology for computing is very expensive. So there's that. And then there's another one that's annealing, which is a different way of getting these subatomic particles to superposition in a way where you can kind of use them. And then I'm sure they'll come up with other technologies, but there are other technologies. I mean, just think about, the early days of VHS and beta and all that sort of thing. We'll see which one is dominant. The really fun one is this concept of entanglement. So this is where these subatomic particles can kind of almost like build a relationship where they mirror each other, and not just mirror each other, but they can mirror each other even if they're separated over great distances. So we're still trying to kind of figure out how to effectively utilize it. Right now, there's a lot of talk about quantum communications doing that, where you could have extended, very accurate communications because of the ability of these subatomic particles to kind of still be in the same state, even though they're physically separated. So again, if you want to have fun, dig into that one and you can take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I'm hoping that eventually that leads to teleportation, not just communication, but being able to be in a different place, separated because of that at some point. We'll see. That's a long way out on the roadmap. Okay, great. So these sort of foundational concepts are increasingly well understood, but how are we doing as a species at turning that into actually usable technology at this point?
Yeah, and that is probably the big question right now. Again, especially when you get into the market, you're going to see a lot of volatility in the market right now. And that's because people are speculating how close are we to real practical applications with this technology. Some of you are probably familiar with the Gartner hype cycle curve, which talks about technology and how quickly it develops and it's accepted. And I would say that we're still kind of on the front end of the curve, but it really depends on the application. And that's what makes it confusing. So when people make broad statements about, hey, we're 20 years out from practical quantum computing, the answer back is, well, really, it depends, right? Because the argument is that there are actual applications currently today that use quantum computing. So it is there. It's just a question of, how broad and how applicable is it going to be for across the whole economy. What I will tell you is that if you just Google, like every night, I just Google quantum news, and you will see breakthrough after breakthrough almost on a daily basis. So this is a very fast moving market. It's not 100% certain which applications are going to break out first and what that implication is going to be, but it's one that's definitely worth watching.
Okay, got it. Maybe for those of us who aren't too familiar with the space, what are the sort of the big tech proponents of it, and then maybe some of the smaller, earlier, startup-ier kind of companies that are in the space?
Right, Paul, and that's another great point. So, obviously any of the big tech companies, embedded within everything that they're doing, they probably have a slice that's focused on quantum. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of them. IBM, who we're all familiar with, they actually have a quantum computer that's sitting up in North Carolina, the Research Triangle Park. They're actually basically selling time on that computer. And people are using that computer, not just for research, but also for businesses. Google is an interesting one. If you look back in December of last year, Google announced that they had a 53 qubit chip that they developed called Willow. That really kind of shocked the market. And that's part of what you're seeing that's kind of driving the valuations up. So those are kind of the big tech companies that are, in the quantum space. And then there's several independent companies. I mean, Pure Quantum plays mostly around the computing space. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but, as an example, IonQ, D-Wave, and Rigetti. So these are all companies. They're actually publicly traded, but they're still, in some cases, they're not profitable. I think in most cases, they're not profitable yet, but they're on different pathways to get that profitability. And they're going after different markets and different technologies to get there. In terms of what are the big apps out there, what are the main applications? Probably the biggest one I spoke about already is this quantum encryption and decryption. I mean, I'll call that kind of the killer app quantum right now. That's the national security kind of number one priority when it comes to quantum. Related to that, we got into this a little bit, but the quantum communications. We could actually foresee like a quantum internet, at some point, or at least quantum networks that are very secure, very efficient, very fast. Quantum sensing. So because it works at the subatomic particle level, quantum sensors have a whole nother level of accuracy that we don't have with current sensors. And especially when you think of things like healthcare, we're actually looking at a couple of companies that are like in pharmaceuticals, where you're actually designing molecules. There's some recent breakthroughs where they can actually see the subatomic particles within individual molecules in the healthcare space. So that would allow you to really, really design some incredibly new drugs, just as an example. And then the last one I'll throw out there is quantum optimization. We have a lot of supply chains. We're a manufacturing state. So think about, aerospace, putting together big airplanes, how complex that supply chain is. Again, because of its ability to solve complex problems, we think quantum computers could make some pretty significant changes in the efficiencies in the way we run our supply chains.
An impressively wide range of applications to cover just there in a couple of minutes, but I think it does give a good sense of how broadly applicable this technology could be, even now, the front end of the adoption curve.
Absolutely.
If I wanted to invest in something that wasn't a startup, we'll talk about some of the startup investing implications of this in a minute. But if I just wanted to invest right now in some of this sort of wave, what are the ways that I could do that? What are the opportunities to do that today?
Yeah, and of course I have to put the disclaimer on that, anything I'm saying, don't hold me.
Right. Yeah, no financial advice, just curious
right.
about what the opportunities might be.
Advice. I'm going to make some observations, right? And like I said, there is just so much news out there, and there's a lot of hype, and it is hype in some cases, but some of it's real. There's great opportunities from the standpoint because we're on, I'll use the term bleeding edge and leading edge. In my personal opinion, we're transitioning from bleeding edge to leading edge in terms of now some of these technologies are actually being proved out, and there's even some early applications. So if you time it right, if you put the bet in the right place, obviously you could get some very high returns. I kind of liken this to anyone who's played in the crypto market, for the last several years. It's kind of like where crypto was earlier. And so if you got that kind of risk profile and you're willing to go for it, it could be very, very interesting.
So you think we're at Bitcoin price circa 2011 then in the quantum equivalent? Is that the proposition?
Yeah, maybe, or maybe even a little bit later. But, it's not unusual to see valuations of quantum-related companies. And I'm talking primarily about the pure quantum plays, right? Of like, 5-10% on a daily basis. I'll give you a great example. Probably a few weeks ago, the CEO of NVIDIA, the guys who make all high-end chips, came out and he basically said, hey, this quantum computing stuff, I mean, it's really not going to be practical for 20 years from now. Immediately, some of the leading quantum companies were dropping 20, 40%, in one day. Now they come back to some extent, but all it takes is one remark from someone, and you're going to see that kind of level of volatility. Okay. That being said, if you look at the overall trend, you go into some of these pure technology plays, and kind of like crypto, it was kind of playing around at a certain level. And then really in the last year, they started to pop. So I'm going to talk now about kind of a few options if you want to jump into the market. And I'm going to do it kind of from a level of risk standpoint. So there is one ETF out there. It's called Defiance Quantum. It's QTUM. It's basically a combination of, I think it was 71 different companies that are, significantly tied to quantum technology. So that's kind of like your safest bet if you really want to bet on quantum. So you want something that's kind of a pure quantum, but you don't want to take the risk of picking winners. I took a look at it this morning, and year over year, it's up 52%. So I think, that's kind of like your safe, your safest play if you want to just participate, but you don't want to try to pick a winner. The other safe play, of course, is you just invest in the large tech companies. You may not have as high of an upside on them because, it depends on how much of their portfolio is really focused on quantum. But to just give you an idea, Google, we talked about the Willow chip, year over year, up 32%. IBM, mentioned that they have, a computer up there, Research Triangle Park. up 41%. And interestingly enough, one of the stocks that we believe is going to track with quantum is NVIDIA, the one that crashed the market just a few weeks ago. And they're up 86%. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with NVIDIA. So let me switch to, the people that want to try to pick the winner. And I'm going to talk about 4 publicly traded companies. I'm using Charles Schwab, so I don't know if they're on the NASDAQ or not. They probably are. One of them I mentioned was IonQ. That's up 303% year over year. Getty, who I mentioned, up over 1,000%, 1,002%. Quantum computing, 1,239%. And D-Wave, which is actually a Canadian company, is up 545%. So 2024 was like the big year. Yeah. And again, there's a little bit of a reset. So there's some volatility going on right now, but I kind of expect that you're going to see a continued growth in these quantum stocks just based on the number of announcements that are coming out.
Okay. Well, we should probably reiterate that what people invest in is their own investment decisions, and none of that was advice. It's interesting that there are those options out there already. Yes. That people can back this technology as a whole. Maybe bringing it back to the South Carolina angle, tell us a bit more about what you're working on with the SC Quantum activity.
Sure. This is probably one of the most exciting parts of the conversation because I think most of the people, if you mention quantum, South Carolina would not be the first state that would jump.
Yes, right.
Right, yeah. Right. And so there's a couple of wrinkles here that really make this interesting. First of all, when we're talking about the actual research and development of quantum technology, that would be kind of an accurate statement. Love South Carolina, great state, but the heavy lifting R&D for quantum is not mostly taking place here, right? But what we're really looking at is the quantum economy itself. So whoever develops this technology, and as I said, it's kind of like the early days of any technology. There's competing technologies, and we don't want to necessarily bet on one or the other. But what we do know is at some point, somebody actually has to take these quantum computers and figure out how can we actually help businesses? How can we get results with these things? And when you step back and you look at South Carolina, especially because, heavy manufacturing base, strong in automotive, strong in aerospace, a lot of healthcare. And especially if you kind of open the aperture outside of just South Carolina and look at some of our neighbors, that's where we really see the opportunity. So we say a couple of things about SC Quantum, which is the organization that I'm part of, I'm on the board of. We're really trying to prepare South Carolina for the quantum economy. And that includes things like, having a workforce. Again, when you throw out the word quantum, most of us, including me, when I first heard it, it's like, oh, I don't have a PhD. So what am I going to do with all this stuff? But again, it's got to turn into a business, right? So our focus, we use the term peopleware rather than hardware and software. Right.
Okay. Yep.
So we're trying to work on all the stuff other than the hardware and software. Let all the PhDs and the smart people figure that out. We're trying to say, okay, what do you do with all this stuff when you develop it? There's 3 pillars to what we're working on. The first one is education. So there's the obvious workforce development. It's kind of funny if you actually go on these job boards and actually put in the word quantum, you will actually see job descriptions popping up that have quantum in them now. So businesses already starting to think about it. Curriculum development, so that, that's your traditional education space. We're not developing the curriculum ourselves, but we may invest in it, or we may kind of collaborate with others to see that we get the best curriculum possible. Experiential learning. Okay. Once we get some practical apps, maybe at some point we even get, kind of like a smaller quantum computer that, students can actually get their hands on, work on. They're fairly expensive.
Yeah.
So it might be hard for one organization to purchase one. And the last thing I'm really excited about is we've actually partnered with a company, and we've developed kind of like a Quantum 101 online course that we're calling a micro-credentialing course. And we want to make that available. It's kind of an 8th to 12th grade. But again, this kind of ties to workforce development and everything. And, we're working right now. We've actually developed the platform. We're pretty close to minimum viable product. And then we're going to figure out how we want to make that available to folks to prepare.
Okay, got it. So how did this sort of organization come about? Let's start with the history of
Yeah.
that.
So very interesting. I don't want to get all the details because they'd probably be even more interesting for some of you. But it really started with a state grant. Our executive director, Joe Queen, was actually tasked by one of the state senators to say, what is something that South Carolina could invest in that would truly be disruptive, truly would be innovative, that would be something that would give us kind of almost national recognition. And Joe went back and, he did a bunch of research and, what he came back with is, hey, there's a lot of talk about this thing, quantum. So to make a long story short, around roughly the summer of 2023, it was at least announced. It may have been actually allocated earlier. We received a $15 million grant from South Carolina. And this gets into kind of the later story. So Joe just, happened to know me. And obviously I didn't have a quantum background, but he called me that summer and, basically said, hey, listen, got $15 million, we're going to form this organization and we're going to try to prepare South Carolina for quantum. And I was like, quantum what? Quantum who? What is that? But he stuck with me and we officially launched the SC Quantum as an organization really about a year ago. So in a year, let's talk about a few things that we've done. One of the things that we did was we offered grants, and specifically we gave a grant to a few college kids there at the University of South Carolina. And the grant was to buy some time on that IBM computer that I was talking about. Well, these guys put together a project to basically say, could you bet on hedge funds, or could you do could you build a hedge fund company that used quantum computing for their analytics, right? They ended up actually going to an MIT Quantathon, competition, and they actually finished third in the country, which was amazing, right? Because they were up against MIT teams. They were up against a team of scientists that, were working in these federal labs, and they came in third. Not only did they do that, they have now taken that concept and they've created a company, the first South Carolina-based quantum company around hedge funds. It's called Shaw Circle. And the last I heard, their performance was like in the top 10% of hedge funds. So, little South Carolina, and here we're kind of, leading with this sort of thing. So that's the sort of stuff that we can do.
Funnily enough, I saw them pitch earlier before the holidays. Didn't understand a word of the pitch, but did understand the output of the pitch in terms of their ability to do things. It was actually pretty compelling. So that's a great story.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme throughout this is don't get hung up in all the technology and the quirky names and concepts and all that sort of stuff. Let's look at where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah, right.
Are we building companies or companies using this to get, real changes in their performance? All right. So that was that. That's a grant. We also had a group that kind of focuses on quantum. There's a publication called Quantum Insider that's probably like, the best publication for following quantum. Their parent company did a eco study for South Carolina for us, and we released that last summer. So that really kind of laid the baseline, showed the full potential of, how it could impact the South Carolina economy. Also looked at how competitive we were with the other states, which gets back to the why South Carolina question. So that was really helpful. And then this fall, we actually sponsored a Quantathon, which again, it's a quantum computing analysis type competition where you have different teams. We actually had teams from outside the state that participated in that. And the winners got to go to Qatar for a big cup. Yeah. Which leads to the next thing that, little SC Quantum somehow has, caught on to just an amazing amount of recognition at not just the national level, but the global level. Joe, just a few weeks ago, was out at the Qatar quantum conference and sitting on panels and all. He's also on the UN panel. The United Nations has declared 2025 the kind of the year of quantum. So he's on the panel there. He's on the national, I think it's called the QEDC panel. And most excitingly for us, we've put a lot of effort in the last few months on putting in for a $160 million NSF grant and I'm proud to say we're finalists. We're putting in our final submission really next week. And then we're just going to cross our fingers and hope we get that. If we don't win that one, there's other grants out there, but there's a lot of money going into quantum development, and we're hopeful that we'll get more funding than the little $15 million that we're working with right now.
Good luck. That does sound like a transformative approach if you can tap into some of that.
Yeah.
How does the next year look for those kind of activities that you've been working on?
Yeah, I think, Paul, a lot of that depends on if we get the funding, right? So, as I mentioned, we were given $15 million. We still have money left there. We certainly think we have a pathway to using that, efficiently, doing what we're doing now. But the exciting thing is, if we win a grant, like this $160 million NSF grant, then we have a chance to take some bigger bets, do some more things, put some more people into our organization. And that's really kind of where we're at, is we're doing a little bit of scenario planning. I'm sure you're familiar with that, of, okay, what does it look like if the funding changes or if the market or requirements change? But like I said, almost every day, there's some kind of announcement coming out. So in some ways, we really have to stay flexible with this. But what we really believe is that, especially if you take into account the region, not just South Carolina itself, we've got a great nexus of academia and organizations, federal research and development type places, and business. I mean, we've got a lot of business, and that's where quantum's really going to make money, right?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just to recap the why South Carolina part again. I mean, the people we're approached does seem to be unusual. I'm not sure I've heard somebody articulate that kind of approach before. So is that something that's particularly useful for South Carolina, or how does the sort of South Carolina part play into it?
Yeah, it's actually been very interesting. Anyone who's done prospecting before kind of understands this, right? I mean, doing a cold call is really tough. But the interesting thing about this is we've reached out to organizations and kind of like hoped and prayed that, you would either get an email back or, someone would actually answer the phone or call us back. And the hit rate has been kind of amazing. So I think we're kind of onto something. There's a couple of things that drive that. One is that a lot of this federal grant funding that I've been talking about, what the people who are awarding it are telling everyone is that we want to see regional collaboration. We don't want to see one organization put in a grant saying, we're the best guys and you give us the money and we'll figure it out. So our collaborative approach, of trying to pull people together, like that NSF grant, we probably, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we probably have 30 or 40 different organizations, that are involved in it. And, we were the ones that just kind of pulled it together, right? We were the ones that just approached everyone and said, hey, you want to join? We got these folks. And they're like, yeah, we're all for it. So to your point, there's not a lot of folks out there that are really taking that collaborative peopleware type approach. That's a distinct advantage for us. How long we'll maintain that advantage. There is kind of a first mover aspect to this, but for right now, I think we're very well positioned.
Okay, great. For people inspired to participate or have an interest in this and didn't know where to go, how do you encourage them to get involved in either what you're doing or in this kind of activity more generally?
Yeah, well, my first thing would be, if you're interested, like I said, just go out there and read the news. If you're really interested, there's tons of articles, websites, whatever. You can even take, some online tutorials to give you a little bit of background and understanding of the quantum economy. Of course, there is a website for SC Quantum. It's www.scquantum.com. You can go there. We also have a pretty big presence on LinkedIn. I'm sure most of you are on LinkedIn. So if you go and like the LinkedIn thing for SC Quantum, you'll get us in your news feed. Quantum Insider, as I mentioned, is a great publication. Again, they're on LinkedIn. So I scan that every day too, just to see what's going on. Those are probably the best ways. If some of you are really, really interested, certainly reach out to me. If things go well, we probably will need some more folks in our organization. We're not very big at all. We're basically a handful of folks right now. But I will say, again, very early, and it's got to be someone. I mean, it's got really has to be your passion. If you're just curious about learning more, go out there, hit the website, read the news feeds. if you really want to get your hands dirty per se, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, great. Well, you weren't an expert in quantum 2 years ago, right? Before your friend tapped you to learn about it. So you can get up the learning curve pretty quickly if you need to.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing. You don't have to be a PhD in quantum physics. That's not necessarily what we need right now. There are hundreds of quantum physics PhDs out there that are working the technology, but we need to work on everything else in that business plan, right?
Yeah. Got it. Well, great. I've enjoyed getting to know more about what you guys are working on. I would personally love to see more quantum-based startups in South Carolina. So we've had one already that you've given the grant to and has been through the process. We'd love to see some more. So looking forward to seeing the output of that as things move along.
Yeah, Paul, I'm with you. I would love to see some companies come through our due diligence so we can invest in them.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's always nice to invest in public stocks that are having a nice wave, but it's even better to be in earlier in the private things before they hit that bar. So
right, and the entrepreneurial, that entrepreneurial pillar, that's really the exciting piece. Like I said, we're lucky. We got Shaw Circle, but I could see a lot more. So building that commercialization ecosystem for quantum, I think that could be a huge differentiator for us as well.
Great. Well, Curtis, thank you. I appreciate your time today. We'll look out for more quantum-related events around the PD and around South Carolina to come over the coming months.
Sounds great. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for listening. Visit us at ventureinthesouth.com for a complete list of previous and future shows.